Hey everybody, it's me, Steve Schnee, the CD Junkie. On this episode of CD Junkie, I'm going to be talking about a British duo by the name of Splinter. Now, don't feel bad if you don't know who Splinter is, have never heard of Splinter, but I'm here to sort of introduce you to them if you haven't, and if you are familiar with Splinter, just sit back and enjoy the ride. Now, I always like to start off these videos by telling you how I got into the artist, and I have to admit that I was totally unaware of them when they first came out. It was probably maybe the late 70s before I discovered one of the albums in a cutout bin, Licorice Pizza, and I saw it was on Dark Horse Records. So, oh my gosh, it's produced by George Harrison. So I immediately bought it, and that's how I got into the band. Now, of course, I lost touch with them over time. This is before the internet. All I thought was that they had 3 albums out, but it was fantastic when I found out years later that they had a total of 5 albums out, and I'm going to introduce you to the band right now. Now, Splinter is Bob Purvis and Bill Elliott. They came together in, I believe, like 1970 or so, and they were members of various bands. You know, they had made demos, and Mal Evans, who was the Beatles road manager, sort of discovered them and brought them to Apple and introduced them to the rest of the gang, so to speak. Now, Bill Elliott, the singer, actually sang lead on a song called God Save Us by Bill Elliott and the Elastic Oz Band that was released on Apple Records. Some of you may recognize the sleeve or recognize the title of the song. It was a John Lennon Yoko Ono composition, and I believe John and Yoko handled the B-side of the single. And of course, it was a political single. It didn't do that well, and it sort of faded away. And then by 1973, George Harrison was producing or putting together a film called Little Malcolm and His Struggle Against the Eunuchs, and Splinter provided a song called Lonely Man, which I don't think was ever officially released. It was only in the film, but that was a song produced by George Harrison and featured Pete Ham of Badfinger on it, which is kind of a coincidence because Splinter, I'm going to tell you this now, Splinter has this great melodic quality to them, especially in their harmonies and, of course, the songwriting, that isn't the Pete Ham side of Badfinger. It's sort of, I'd like to compare Splinter to maybe like the later period original Badfinger, the Tommy Evans songs, like When I Say from Ass, or King of the Load from Wish You Were Here, Where Do We Go From Here from the self-titled album, that kind of stuff, where it's not this hard, heavy stuff, and it's sort of a folk pop, not power pop, but very melodic, and like I said, the harmonies. Bobby Purvis wrote most of the songs. Bill Elliott sang lead on most of them, but their harmonies together were fantastic. But they never released anything on Apple Records. But what happened is George Harrison, of course, went over and formed Dark Horse Records and signed Splinter. I believe they were the first signing to Dark Horse Records. And this was the album that came out. It's called The Place I Love. Came out in 1974. This is, I believe, an Asian version of the release. And this album got a lot of great tracks like Groovy Train and Drink All Day and China Light, Cost to Find Town, Haven't Got Time. And the album was produced by George. He plays tons of instruments on it. And this album uses a lot of the people that George had worked with around that time, like Gary Wright, Billy Preston, Alvin Lee, Jim Keltner, Klaus Vorman, Willie Weeks, Mel Collins. And it's really a fantastic album. Like I said, it's very light, very airy. It's closer to a Simon & Garfunkel meets Badfinger than it is to the Beatles, but it's still very melodic and wonderful. And of course, George's sound is all over this record, and it's really a fine release. It came out in 1974. The Place I Love by Splinter. Now, Harder to Live was their second album, came out in 1975. An interesting thing I read about this album is that they had booked time at A&M Studios in Los Angeles to record their second album, but Bobby Purvis was suffering from allergies from the smog, so George Harrison took that studio time and recorded his album Extra Texture. So I find that, kind of interesting. But they did finally get in the studio and recorded their second album called Harder to Live. Came out in 1975. This is produced by Tom Scott, and most of the tracks features guitars by Chris Spedding and Waddy Wachtel. And of course, Tom Scott's on the album. Some really fabulous songs on this album as well. There's all the people that worked on it. And like Please Help Me is great. Halfway There is great. Which Way Will I Get Home? And of course, the re-recorded Lonely Man, the song that they had recorded in 1973 for Apple. The re-recorded version is here. And it's really actually fantastic. Splinter, Harder to Live. Now, Two Man Band came out in 1977. Another fine collection of songs. Little Girl, Round and Round's great. New York City, Who Am I? Motions of Love, Love Is Not Enough. Another fine collection of songs. The album features George. Rod Argent is on this. David Briggs actually plays keyboards and provides string arrangements. And the Memphis Horns are on the album. And that Splinter two-man band came out in 1977. Now, that was it for Dark Horse Records. The band did not split up like I had assumed. They just went and they signed with Columbia Records. Nothing released in the U.S. And I never saw these albums in import bins or whatever. Their next album was called Streets at Night. Came out in 1979. And, of course, you think to yourself, like, well, they look slicker. This is probably a disco or new wave record. It's really not. They just took that classic Splinter sound. They did add maybe some keyboards to it, and maybe a song or two might have a little more upbeat, but it's that classic Splinter sound. The CD has loads of bonus tracks. And some of these were from Japanese-only releases, like there was a release where Splinter provided lead vocals on 4 tracks by a Japanese band, so they added those here. And basically, this just rounds up the tracks from the Columbia years. There's one more album I need to show you, though. But this is Streets at Night. It's a great collection of pop songs. If you're looking for something beefy, power poppy, you're not going to get it. Some of this is slick. Some might even consider it, lightweight. But, when you hear those harmonies and you hear the melodies, it does kind of remind you of the Tommy Evans side of Badfinger mixed with a little Paul Simon. Now, the next album, their final, was self-titled when it first came out in 1980. Now, I call the album the Freddie Mercury album, and I'll show you. I'm not really fond of this cover. First thing I see is Bobby Purvis right there with a Freddie Mercury-looking mustache. It's a very odd cover, but still full of wonderful songs. In fact, the song Innocence, the very first song on the album here, it was kind of sounds like a mixture between I Can't Tell You Why by the Eagles and Baker Street by Jerry Rafferty. It's kind of in that vein, so it's really kind of cool. Another great collection of songs. This album was released a year later in Japan, and they called it Sail Away. Completely different cover. It wasn't the Freddie Mercury cover. And then they took off a song and added a song. Well, this has the original lineup, and the song they added, the Japanese version, can be found on this. Like I said, pretty much these 2 CDs here gather up almost every Columbia recording. So if you buy these 2 CDs, and then the British reissues of these that have a few bonus tracks, you're going to have pretty much the entire Splinter collection. Now that's it with Splinter. If you are a Beatles fan or a Badfinger fan, George Harrison fan, you're definitely going to want to check them out. These 2 albums might be hard to find in the US, but during my vinyl shopping days, I saw these quite a bit, so definitely check them out. Anyway, that's it for this episode of CD Junkie. I appreciate you hanging out and listening to me babble on about Splinter. I hope it inspires you to check them out. There's a great website out there that's going to tell you a lot more than I told you in this video, and that's www.splinterlibrary.com. I believe Tom Brennan is the guy that put that website together. You're going to be able to find out all the information about the band. They are very much worth your while. If this is a band that passed you by, it's never too late to enjoy the music today. But that's it for me. I appreciate you. And until the next time, remember me. I'm Steve Schnee, the CD Junkie.